Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. And as you can tell here in the dojo, we have our good friend, Pat Flynn, with us. Say hello, Pat.
Hello, Pat. It's good to be here, Gary. Thanks. It's always a joy to be on the radio show, and even more fun when we get to do it in person.
That's right. Yeah. It's to be able to sit here and chat. And, I almost wish that we started the show earlier because we had a really interesting discussion right before the break. So,
well, that's how it always goes for any podcasters out there. Just hit record right away because I've often found it's the behind-the-scenes conversation that sometimes is the most interesting.
That's true. That's true. Or just even better, just secretly run it, recording all the time, and then you could just edit out.
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. By the way, that's what I did for you. Let's see if I'm bumped up. You know what? It's the subject today is a very interesting subject because we're going to deal with the case for religion.
Right.
And that in and of itself is a question out there because I know a lot of people they don't believe in God, but even if they start saying, okay, maybe there is a God out there, why in the world would I even entertain becoming religious?
Right.
Why not just do it yourself?
Yeah, be spiritual but not religious. So a little background on this: I have been recently invited to come on and debate religion and make the case for religion on a podcast. It's actually in the fitness industry, so this should be an interesting exchange. That's later this week, and it got me thinking about a lot of things that you just brought up. There, Gary. First off, what do we even mean by religion? It's a great philosophical question of exactly how to define religion. First off, but there's also the sort of contemporary cultural understanding of religion of whatever else it is. It's archaic, it's cobwebbed, it's out of date. Much better to be spiritual but not religious. The religious people are those who are kind of stuck in the past, in some sense. They're the ignorant savages who haven't caught up to the times. So yes, if you believe in God, clearly it's okay to be spiritual, whatever that means, but certainly don't become religious. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and I said, we've certainly made the case for a religion, particularly many times, but it might be fun just to talk about the case for religion generally.
Sure.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, because there could be people that aren't avowed atheists. They just grew up in homes where God was never talked about. It wasn't part of their life. They go to secular college. So it's really a blank spot.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, why should I even care about religion?
Right.
Yeah.
And so one thing I think that's helpful is working through different concepts of religion. And you talked, chatting yesterday, again, another conversation that should have been recorded, about how religion is sort of a contemporary boxing in a sense that we kind of, as Catholics, I think, should fight against. I really just like thinking about worldview, right? Soup to nuts. What is reality, right? Like how do we answer questions? The big questions of origin, where do we come from? Meaning, what are we doing here? Destiny, where are we going? Morality, how are we to behave? And trying to work out a systematic worldview. And of course, I'm going to say whatever that is just going to be Catholic.
Yeah, right.
And if you just want to say that there's a true religion, fine, fair, we can use that language if we want. But I sometimes find that shifting to the idea of worldview can be a helpful way to move along on a practical level, if only because people have such, especially younger people, millennials, as soon as you just say the word religion, immediately the prejudices pop up and there's all these barriers to entry. The other thing I was going to mention how we could approach it is just kind of going through people's relationship to religion, how they relate to religion as well. And there's different positions there, from atheist, agnostic, religious pluralists, religious particularists. So yeah, wherever you want to begin the conversation, right? Lots of ways we can approach it. Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't we start with the bottom basic, about why even step into the sphere of the religious worldview? You know, what does it have to offer people?
Right. So I would say something like this, and I think this is an interesting way to frame it, because especially if somebody is spiritual but not religious, to say, well, I've got my relationship with God, and that's fine that you have yours as a religious person, but this is mine. So to each their own. Yeah. And I think it's very helpful to at least ask them to consider flipping that question of, okay, I think it's awesome that you want to have a relationship with God. I think that's predominantly the reason we're here, right? But is there any particular way that God wants us to have a relationship with Him? And if you think that question through and you follow different arguments and evidences and lines of reasoning, I think we'll be able to answer yes. There does seem to be a way that God wants us to have a relationship with Him, and it's actually quite specific. And if there is a way that God wants us to relate to Him, we should probably take His advice, right? We should probably consider His perspective at least somewhat, rather than just wanting to have it our way entirely. And at the end of the day, I think if you pursue that, and again, you can think of it in terms of worldview or religion. I think it's just very simple of, okay, well, how does God want to reach me? How does He want to have a friendship with me? It'll come down to getting baptized, living the sacramental life, a deep intimacy with Christ in the real presence of the Eucharist. The way God wants to relate to us in the way that He revealed to us. So that's another way to approach it. In terms of how people kind of relate themselves to religion, just real quick, and maybe we could open up any one of these threads and see their pros and cons, or what we might be there to say about them. There's atheists, right? Most people are familiar with that. Now, when I think about atheists, I think about my former self, and an atheist is somebody who is making something of a positive claim about something being absent from reality, right? That there really is no God or anything like God. And the more manly and formidable atheists will try and substantiate that claim. Right, they really do try to come to the argumentative table, and they don't play these childish games of saying, well, I just lack a belief or something like that. That's never interested me. Yeah. I always saw that as kind of weak. Or at least it's the next kind of category of person, and that would be an agnostic. And the agnostic says, well, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not, maybe I'm not convinced, but if you present me with some evidence, I'm open-minded to it, but I'm unsure. So that would be an agnostic. Then we have the different kind of brands of theism, if you will, of somebody who believes in some transcendent reality or some either God or something like God, right? Whether they think the universe is divine. And I like to break it out into religious pluralists and two categories there. We kind of have what is sometimes called the naive religious pluralists, and this would be a lot of your college undergrads who say, well, religion it's all the same, right? They're all teaching the same thing. So
yeah, right.
Again, just pick whatever goes for you. There's no difference, right? Right. And nobody can sustain that position with anything more than a 5-minute Google search as soon as you see
right.
the mutually conflicting claims that religions make. We were talking about this last night. I mean, you have Islam, for example, personal God, somewhat of a voluntarist God, it would seem. Kind of versus, say, various branches of Buddhism, certain branches of Zen Buddhism, which strike me as borderline nihilistic in many respects, right? They don't really seem to want to affirm any transcendent reality, certainly no personal God. It's hard to see if they affirm something like an immaterial soul or not. Even within Buddhism, you have mutually conflicting claims, right? So, not even all Buddhism is the same, let alone all religion. So what do you do from there if you want to try and maintain pluralism? I think you got to go to more of a John Hick style, a more sophisticated religious pluralism, and say something like, well, they're all wrong in the details, right? But they're all kind of, pointing towards something that is true, some transcendent aspect of the world, and they're all useful in their own ways, or at least they all can be useful. So again, pick whatever one does it for you. And you'll be just fine, right? Because your religion is something like, or the different religious systems or belief systems are something like a useful tool to help us stop being so egotistical or whatever, to become more loving. And that's more sophisticated because it understands that there's mutually conflicting claims in religion, It's either A or not A. So it just says they're all wrong, right? None of them has the fullness of the truth, if you will. But, they're all kind of hinting at or gesturing towards something that is true, that there is a transcendent aspect or ultimate meaning to our life, even though they fail to grasp it completely. Mm-hmm. One of my issues with that form of pluralism, and my first entry to that was reading Aldous Huxley as I was coming out of my atheist phase and I was reconsidering religion. I was interested in pluralism, I think, as a lot of people who are former atheists become interested in. Huxley has a book called The Perennial Philosophy, and he kind of makes a pluralistic position seem somewhat more sophisticated and tenable. And then you have John Hick, author of Evil and the God of Love. He's pretty well known for that position. But eventually I realized, well, how is this not actually religious particularism in a sense? Because they want to say that whatever else religion is, they're all kind of trying to see the whole elephant, but they're only seeing a part of it, so they don't know what it really is. But the pluralist is in a privileged position. They can see it for what it really is.
Yeah, right.
So they're really saying, all y'all are wrong, but I'm right, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of saying that you've got it when other people don't. So you're kind of a particularist.
Yeah, right.
At the end of the day.
Actually, I think you're even more a particularist because you're saying everybody's wrong and I'm right, where, at least Catholics would say, a billion of us are right, and a lot of you agree with many things we say, But if you say, you're basically saying everyone's wrong except me because I'm the one that says everybody got something wrong. Right.
Well, and sometimes you hear this charge against religion, like how arrogant.
Yeah, exactly. That's what struck me too. Yeah.
How arrogant. Well, first off, people can just be wrong, right? Yeah. There's nothing arrogant about, people. We'll come back on this note about what humility, I think, actually appropriately is. This is
Very good. Very good. We're chatting with, in studio, Pat Flynn, Pat Flynn Show, chroniclesofstrength.com. We'll be right back.
Psalm 119 says, "Your word is a lamp for my feet and a light to my path." According to St. John Paul II, being a Christian means saying yes to Jesus Christ. It consists in surrendering to the Word of God and relying on it, but also endeavoring to know better and better the profound meaning of this Word. May God grant that we always rely on His Word, read it often, and put it into practice.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Pat Flynn of the Pat Flynn Show, chroniclesofstrength.com, and all sorts of other cool stuff. He also does a podcast with another good friend of ours, Eric Robinson, Polypat, dual broadcast. And also, hey, I forgot to welcome everybody, so I can't do that. I want to welcome all of you. Streaming live stream, Facebook, YouTube, all the other platforms. Welcome aboard. And I noticed in the chat room of the break, Rick says, hello, Gary. I see you brought your personal trainer. No, this is what happens when you don't have someone like Pat. So this is like before, after kind of. But right before the break, we were talking about something that actually hits home with me because I was there was a portion in my life early on where I was one of those, you have a truth for you, I have a truth for me. Mm-hmm. No one really grasped the full truth, and it's kind of all fuzzy. And I remember thinking to myself that, wow, I'm really tolerant. I'm really, broad-minded. Mm-hmm. And then, like you mentioned, it occurred to me like, wait, I'm the opposite of that because I'm saying everybody's wrong except me.
Right, and like most people, let's keep this in mind, most people are religious particularists. So by being a pluralist, you are really saying that, most people have gotten it really wrong, but I've gotten it right. Yeah. So, about the whole arrogance charge, because you'll hear this a lot, and, humility is not self-depreciation. Humility is not bringing yourself down to act like you don't know what you think you do know. Mm-hmm. That would be a vice. Humility is not, acting like you know more than you do, but it's really just kind of knowing your place. And so I think I've worked through this stuff. I used to be an atheist. I ran the arguments of natural theology. They seem good to me. I look at the historical evidence for Christianity. It seems good to me. I look at the confirmatory signs of the Catholic Church. It seems right to me. Like, what else do you want me to do? Yeah. Like, this seems right. I'm not going to look at this and make this assent and then act like it isn't what it is, which I think is a solid case for the truth of Catholicism. In the same way that if I'm doing a math problem, I come out with an answer and somebody comes out with a different answer, I think they're wrong. I just think you're wrong, and here's why. And we don't. So you're never going to escape the charge of arrogance, but I don't even think it applies. I don't think it's arrogant just to say no. I think this is true, and here's why. But if it is arrogance, then it's going to cut both ways, no matter what. So if you're a pluralist, look, as much as you're trying not to act like you have the truth claim by saying we all have our truths, that is a truth claim.
Yeah. Right.
You're arrogant too, then, right? So okay, great. We're all arrogant. Let's just see who's arrogant and right.
Exactly. Which is, like you said, the true definition of humility is just to acknowledge things as they truly are.
Right. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that one up because that is a very common attitude that a lot of people it's a posture they assume towards religion. How arrogant of Christians to think that they've got it, right? Mm-hmm. Without reflecting and asking, am I maintaining a similar attitude?
Yeah,
right?
Well, let me throw a curveball at you.
Let's go.
How about not arrogance, but hypocrisy?
Mm-hmm.
That religious people, they put on airs about what you should and shouldn't do, and then they fail themselves. So me being non-religious, at least I'm not a hypocrite,
right?
Because I don't make any claims.
Well, for hypocrisy, I don't see that bearing on the truth. There's nothing inconsistent in my mind between somebody being completely hypocritical with a position they're absolutely right on.
Right. Exactly.
So it's just
exactly.
I mean, look, I don't think it's good if people are hypocrites. Don't get me wrong. I think you shouldn't be. But somebody could be absolutely right on something and act completely out of line with that. But that itself wouldn't show that they're wrong. You have to look at the arguments. You have to look at the evidence. So so you could just concede that they're hypocrites, but still say, I think they're still right. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. Maybe the only argument somebody could make in my mind would be that your belief system is so high that it's unattainable. So everybody's going to be a hypocrite if you sign into, this ultimate perfection of life that no one else can do. I'm thinking we were talking about Christian Science or something like that, right. And they'll say, well, there were ascended masters who got the Christ principle like Jesus, mm-hmm. right? They rarely mention other people. It's usually just Jesus. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, well, did some of their followers, Mary Baker Eddy, I believe, mm-hmm. Did she attain this?
Right.
And obviously she didn't.
Mm-hmm.
or some New Ager.
Yeah, I could see that, being, I guess, something of a criticism. It wouldn't, just because saying something is difficult doesn't mean that it's not true, but it wouldn't seem to me to apply to Catholicism, at least, because that just seems to me like the heresy of Pelagianism, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, we specifically say you can't do it on your own,
Yeah,
right?
right.
You just can't, right? You need the grace of God. At most, you can never make yourself better as a Catholic, but you can make yourself worse.
Yeah.
Right? But all goodness, all betterness is ultimately coming from God. So even if that were an argument that could take down the truth of something, which I'm not immediately seeing where it could be, but I could see how people would say that. Certainly that's something that would come up. I just don't think it would even apply to Catholicism. That's not what the church teaches.
That's true, yeah. And we do have examples of exemplary figures in the past, saints. So
lots of
Padre Pio, like his relics is here in Michigan, so we could throw a bone to one of my favorite saints, Padre Pio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So back to so those are some problems I have with pluralism, but it doesn't show that it's false yet. Just some things that initially struck me, and then the final category that at least I'll trot out here. If you're spiritual but not religious, you might be a religious pluralist. But then there's the religious particularists. These would be, Catholics are particularists. Most, Christianity is a particularist religion. We believe that there has been a definitive revelation, that there is some fullness of truth to be had. Islam would be another example where there is a very strong claim made. And that this is it in some sense.
Yeah. So it's on the same level of as a mathematical particularist as opposed to one who isn't, which I'm not even sure how you could do math if you weren't a particularist.
But I've heard some bizarre stuff about math recently going around on social media, from everything from, of course, it just not being have any bearing on reality to the only bearing it has is it's something about it being racist or something. So
wow, okay,
yeah, some interesting stuff about math going around.
You never know,
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I guess to kind of turn back to the overall case for religion, then, is the case I would make is for religious particularism and Catholicism,
right,
in particular. But I think it's helpful to kind of survey the landscape and see, even if we can't get a very tight definition on what religion is, we can at least look at the different attitudes or relationships people bear to religion and say, is there merit to any of these?
Yeah, that's important first step, because then at least you have a path.
Right.
Where the non-particularist it's really kind of a do-it-yourself project, isn't it? It's just whatever suits me, what I think is what God would want if I were God.
Right.
Yeah.
And immediately, there's just something a little interesting about that, because if people fall into that attitude, it's an attitude where there's almost never a very fundamental change in a person's life, because they can always just patchwork their religion to accommodate whatever their beliefs already are, politically, morally, etc. So there's kind of a cliche out there like, if religion isn't challenging you, maybe you should challenge your religion. Think about it a little bit more. That isn't a refutation of it, but it is something that seems just almost a little too convenient, in a sense, that if there really is an ultimate objective meaning to life, might I, find myself in a position where I might have to change some things about myself, about my beliefs, etc. So I think that's part of why pluralism and spiritual but not religious is very attractive. It really makes no demands on somebody.
Yeah, right.
It just doesn't. So you can kind of have your proverbial cake and eat it too. I can escape nihilism in a sense, which I think most people want to do, but I don't really have to change anything. We could see why that might be attractive to people.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So once you come down to, there is a particular expression of the truth that must be found somewhere, you're still not out of the woods yet, are you? You still have questions about, do I have a soul? Is everything a soul? Am I part of pantheistic kind of God, all the way to particular Catholicism, Orthodoxy?
Right. So how do you start? Can you adjudicate this? That's the one question, right? So some people will just wonder, I don't even think religious claims can be adjudicated. I don't think, and I think that's completely wrong. I think they can be, and there's a couple of different ways you can go about it. One is through metaphysics, natural theology, arguments about God, and as we've explored on this show before, I think that there are metaphysical demonstrations we can give that really just kind of hack options away. They say whatever else is true, it can't be polytheism. Whatever else is true, it can't be pantheism. So if you take some of the traditional arguments for God, contingency or cosmological style arguments, where you wind up consistently is at a very robust monotheism, specifically a classical theism. So whatever else God is not the universe. The universe is contingent. It's finite. It's composite, right? It's changing. And these are all the types of things that metaphysically cry out for an external explanation, an external cause. So the universe is a creature. It's not divine. Right. And that itself, sort of, if you reach that conclusion, that itself just takes away a large number of options. Pantheism is just, it's off the table of options. So if there's a religious system or a system of belief that says that the universe is God, I think we have very strong evidence, if not demonstrative evidence, against that just from philosophy. Mm-hmm. And so philosophy can, I think, narrow you down to, again, at least a broad monotheism, which, of course, we have the classic Abrahamic religions and, certain aspects of maybe Hinduism could still be accommodated. But, I mean, it really narrows the hunt considerably. Right. So, and I think that can't be overlooked. I think good reasoning, metaphysics, philosophy can help adjudicate religious claims. So whatever else the case is, whatever else religions want to say, if they don't match up or at least aren't compatible with this philosophical conception of God, we either have reason outright to reject them or at least strong evidence against them.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's good because that's something that is accessible to everybody as long as you know what you're doing. Right. You're not just starting off from scratch, but you actually have a good sound metaphysical base to start analyzing. And then that is used to reduce the field so that you end up with a monotheism. And so I guess the next step would be, how do you move from a classical monotheist religion to an even more particular expression of that?
Right. Well, the thing is, this is where our blessed Lord is very handy, as we would expect him to be in his eternal wisdom, right? Yeah. In the sense that many of these, all really, that I've studied at least, different religions that are still on the table make claims about Jesus that are testable, historically testable. Yeah. Islam makes claims, Judaism makes claims, Christianity makes claims, Hindus make claims, Buddhists make claims. So you can go say, okay, which of these claims hold up historically, reliably? Which claim best accords with the best evidence that we have about who Jesus was, when he lived, how he died, whether a true miracle occurred. And just to condense it right now is I think the only one that bears out is the Christian. So
there you go. Got a spoiler alert to get that out for. We're chatting with Pat Flynn of the Pat Flynn Show. Also, chroniclesofstrength.com. More to come on the other side of the break. Listen to Hands on Apologetics.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show on the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
If you shop on Amazon.com, there's an easy way to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Just visit smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center under the desired charity. Now, when you log into your Amazon account and purchase products, a portion of it will automatically go to support Virgin Most Powerful Radio at no cost to you. Thanks in advance for supporting CRC and VMPR, and may God richly bless you and your family.
Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. Realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. As you can tell, for those watching a live feed, we have the great Pat Flynn in the dojo, and we are doing a great workout about the case for religion. And, Pat, you covered a lot of ground, from just starting off with atheism, or maybe just blank, and moving towards, a particular view, and then ultimately you come through philosophy to one of the great monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So Jesus, like you said, it's interesting. All of them make claims about Jesus, and those claims are themselves mutually exclusive. You can't hold on to all. Right. For example, Christianity says Jesus is the Son of God. Islam says God has no son. And Judaism would also deny that as well.
And that Christ wasn't crucified.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a historically testable claim. Yeah. Right? And Islam fails the test. Right?
Yeah. And Islam and Christianity say, well, actually, Islam has a little different version. But Christians would say that Christ raised from the dead. Jews would deny that. Mm-hmm. So you can't say they're all right. There are particular claims. And I guess the next step would be to sort that out.
Yeah, and like I was said, this is where somebody like Gary Habermas or William Lane Craig are very handy, where they can provide, I think, a very robust case, or other scholars like N.T. Wright or Mike Licona, for the historical evidence that supports the resurrection hypothesis, that strongly favors that over any of the other claims that Islam or Judaism or any other religion would make. And as most Christians are aware, is the resurrection, that's the hinge point, right? That's where it all stands or falls. So if there's good evidence for the resurrection, there just is by default good evidence for Christianity, and by that very strong evidence against all the other options, right? Yeah. One other thing that I know we wanted to touch on was just kind of the cumulative case, and I've been in kind of thinking about how I might approach this upcoming debate or conversation is, it's one thing to kind of want to dive down into the weeds of any particular point, whether it's philosophical arguments for God or the historical case for the resurrection. But what I found has often kind of impressed people, and at least causes people to take a step back and maybe reconsider, is just looking at a wide range of data points, experiences, reasons that just fit really, really well with the hypothesis Catholicism is true, let's say. Right. They're either really well explained in terms of explanatory scope and depth, or they might even be predicted in the sense that these are the types of things we would expect if that hypothesis were true. Whereas they don't at all fit or at all can be explained, or at least not adequately explained, on other worldview, on another worldview hypothesis, such as there is no God, or Islam is true, for example, or Protestantism is true. So maybe I'll just march some of these out.
Yeah, and, before you do that, though, you mentioned the debate, and our viewers, I'm sure, it was news to me yesterday off the air. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so someone's about to get body slammed. I'm just kidding. I'm going on my friend Mike Matthews, his Muscle for Life Fitness podcast, and he's got a very, very big audience. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity, because I'm sure they'll be coming from different perspectives. Mike is a very charitable, gracious guy, very smart guy. He's not religious. So he wanted to have me on for a fruitful exchange, to have a little back and forth, and he wants me to present the case and try and persuade him. So
nice.
I'm sure it will be a productive conversation. He's had me on before, and he's one of those guys where even if even if he doesn't see with you, eye to eye with you on certain, he is very sincere, very interested in making the most of the conversation. So I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Do you have a date set?
It will be recorded on Thursday, but since
Okay.
it's a podcast, I'm not entirely sure when it will be aired. But the podcast is called Muscle for Life by Mike Matthews. So a good fitness podcast if you're looking for content. But every once in a while, he does a sort of off-the-wall episode.
Okay.
Just to keep things interesting
So
and fresh.
you're the off-the-wall
I'm going to be the yeah, it's just going to be one random one making the case for religion. Yep.
That's great. Yeah, just tell us about it. I'll announce it on the air.
Yeah,
And,
it'll be fun. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks,
So I interrupted you, but let's look at the particulars of evidence that certainly points towards Catholicism as the best explainable worldview.
Right. So I'll kind of march these out, and then we can dive down on any of the details if we want. But these are things that they're data points, they're experiences, the reasons, etc. That I think are the types of things we would either expect, might even be able to predict, or at least robustly and simply explained by the Catholic hypothesis. So we have, for example, Eucharistic miracles that have been heavily scientifically scrutinized, where agnostic, well-credentialed scientists say we don't have explanations for this, right? Yeah. That's a weird thing. Like, I wouldn't expect that if atheism was true. So that's a data point. We'll put that in there, right? And it's a specifically Catholic data point. I wouldn't expect that if Protestantism were true either, right? On top of that, another confirmatory sign, I would say, are apparitions, Marian apparitions. I mean, most people are probably familiar with Fatima. If you're not, look into it. It's one of these things that you just cannot adequately explain apart from the supernatural. So I think it's, again, something that I would absolutely not expect if atheism were true, and seems to strongly evidence against Protestantism as well. So you have this, some 70,000 witnesses. You have this miracle of the ground drying. It's reported in secular newspapers. Not something that is easily explained, right? But I should qualify it. Not something that is easily explained apart from the hypothesis that Catholicism is true.
Yeah.
So Eucharistic miracles, Fatima. One thing that struck me before I was Catholic, that I think often isn't appreciated fully enough, is just the sheer endurance of the Catholic Church and her indefectibility.
Yeah, that's kind of the forgotten miracle, but it's undeniable because we're here.
We're here. 2,000 years. It's outlasted any other merely human institution, in spite of, as every Catholic must admit, times of great corruption, right?
Yeah.
So, what sometimes people will point against evidence for Catholicism, like bad popes, I actually, upon a deeper analysis, see that as evidence for, because despite every opportunity for the Church to collapse, to change her essential teachings, she hasn't. And she's still here. Massively outlasted any other institution. I think it's something that makes no sense, right? Apart from the fact that Catholicism is true, that God's promise to protect his church against the gates of hell has been kept, right? So that's another, put that as a weight in a scale, right?
Yeah, I was actually going to have that with my hostile witness book. That I remember reading Protestant literature in like the 1800s where they're predicting, well, the Catholic Church has weeks to live. There's no way it's going to continue. It's usually when the Vatican lost its armies, its territory was restricted. And I wanted to put that in my book, but I couldn't remember where I read this stuff, so I never did. But it's interesting as you're reading history. The enemies are always like, this thing's over. It's surprising it lasts this long. And yet it's like the Energizer Bunny, except it's got supernatural batteries.
Keeps punching back. Absolutely, even when you would never expect it to. So yeah, I think that needs to be included in our collection here. Also, of course, famously Catholics have their biblical support. For Christ founding the Catholic Church. Of course, Protestants will disagree on interpretation, but the fact that it is there, Christ founding the Church, leaving us with the Church, giving his authority, the power to bind and loose. People are probably familiar with that. So there's strong biblical data. And good typology, if you will, that really lends credence is the type of thing we would expect on the Catholic hypothesis that is very difficult to explain away from a point of view, I would argue. And then you pair that with the tradition, especially in seeing how Catholic the early church really was. Hierarchical, sacramental, unified, visible. I would expect this if Catholicism were true very early on, as we read in the earliest writings that we have. I would not expect that if Protestantism were true, for example. So, and I kind of want to be clear here is, maybe any one of these points we covered so far could fall, right? And it still wouldn't rebut Catholicism, right? So we have flexibility here. However, if any one of these kind of went through, if a Eucharistic miracle went through, that seems like it would rebut Protestantism.
Yeah.
So there seems to be more flexibility here for the Catholic hypothesis than the Protestant one, and we'll talk about the atheist one too, which I think has very little flexibility at all. Now, to be clear, there are a few things that if they fell in my collection here, Catholicism would fall, like the resurrection, right? Yeah. So there are a few, things that have to stand.
Yeah, Pat, if I could tag on with the perpetuity argument, it's interesting that Judaism, that within the Christian tradition, there's this understanding that the Jews would be present at the last day. Mm-hmm. So we believe that they would go on in perpetuity as well. And they have. Right. So that's another confirmatory thing. But Judaism doesn't have a corresponding belief about Christianity. They can explain why they're still there, but they can't explain why Christianity still exists.
Why is there still a pope around, right? Yeah. Again, think about what hypothesis best explains or predicts it. I just wanted people to think very generally, because I think that this is a good way of thinking about it, right? We have prophecies fulfilled. I have a little Google Doc that we have here, and if maybe we could even link that or somehow for people to download this if they're interested, because I kind of link to some of the details in this. Again, would I expect this sort of these massive series of coincidences of what's predicted in the Old Testament being fulfilled in Christ if Christianity wasn't true? No, I really wouldn't, right? You have a hard time trying to explain these things away. Of course, we mentioned it before. We just have really strong historical evidence that receives widespread support among even very skeptical and liberal scholars of various data points of the life of Jesus that are best explained themselves by the resurrection. Things like his crucifixion, post-mortem appearances, the rapid origin and spread of particularly Christian belief in the resurrection, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. No good naturalistic explanations. The data points are well established, largely agreed on. Again, would I expect this if atheism were true? Not hardly, right? I wouldn't expect this at all.
Well, let me throw a curveball. Mm-hmm. What about mythicism? They could say, well, all those data points are explained because they were ripped off from pagan beliefs.
Yeah, so we had a conversation last night, so it's not too much of a curveball, right?
Right.
Where I was at a bar, just to give a little backstory here, and I was taken back a little bit because, I spent a lot of time, I guess, in the kind of academic world on some of this stuff and working on, like divine simplicity and modal collapse. But then you get back down into a bar with somebody, right? And like, what's their objection? Well, Jesus was a myth.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. People still believe this, right? That's where I think somebody, this is where your hostile witnesses approach comes in really well, because that's where you can take somebody like Bart Ehrman, right? Who's an agnostic. If anything, he seems to be somewhat hostile to Christianity. And he's got a wonderful quote, and he's got a book called Did Jesus Exist, right? Where he just is dedicated to refuting this nonsense of mythicism, and he boldly says Jesus certainly existed, as any competent historian, both Christian and non, will affirm. So this is one of those opportunities where you can use somebody who's hostile to the faith to very quickly undermine mythicism and stuff like that.
Very good. We're chatting with Pat Flynn. More to come on the other side of the break, folks.
We got Ernesto from Long Beach.
I just wanted to comment, and I just wanted to thank you guys. And I kind of wanted to encourage people that are listening, maybe that are not donating, because honestly, I got to be honest, I used to think you guys were a little
too over the top.
That's
right.
If God gave us a lot, and I have the blessing of listening to all this, and I just want to call all the people, I got 5 kids, and I don't make a lot of money, and I'm still donating to you guys.
God bless you, brother. You're amazing.
We have to do this. We have to do the extra. And it's not even the extra. People see it like it's extra. Kneeling for communion, saying your rosary, saying the Divine Mercy Chaplet. It is not extra. It's what the church tells us to do.
Amen. You're a good man, brother.
30 years old, 29 years old, 5 kids, and I thank you guys. But everybody else, man, get on fire. Fight for the truth, man. I know what I'm telling you guys. There's
I
no
love it.
out there.
In Luke 7, Jesus said, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven her, because she has been shown great love. According to St. John of the Cross, Christians should always remember that the value of their good works is not based on number and excellence. Their value is based on the love for God that prompts them to do the works. May we always be motivated by true love for God and not worry so much about what we do, but why we do it.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back to Hands-On Apologetics. And yes, we have a heavyweight in the dojo today. Actually, when it comes to dojo, I don't know if heavyweight would be good. I know judo would be good to have a heavyweight. I'll have to rethink that.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how we're sparring, right? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's you certainly have a lot of mental muscle mass to throw around, and just a great conversation on the case for religion. And Pat, before the break, you mentioned a whole bunch of data points that all kind of converge and point towards Catholicism, like Eucharistic miracles, Marian apparitions, biblical information, historical data points, the resurrection, all sorts of things that the other worldviews don't really explain, doesn't really fit in very well.
Yeah, and that's what we're sort of building something of a cumulative case. At some point we're going to make like an abductive inference, the inference to the best explanation. And I think there's a lot to this. One, it's very intuitive. I think it has a lot of force when you just see, oh yeah, there is a lot here, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think people appreciate that very much. In fact, it seems one of my odd habits is just reading very old apologetic books, and it seems to be something that's been lost in the Catholic faith in modern apologetics, are the confirmatory signs. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we're talking about here. We have these confirmatory signs. Yes, we have the kind of root historical evidence of the resurrection and the founding of the church, but God has given us confirmatory signs along the way that make sense and are the types of things we might expect if the Catholic faith is true. Of course, Eucharistic miracles and apparitions being two of the big ones, right? Yeah. But lives of saints, I think, also count in there.
Absolutely.
And that's something I wish would be brought back in the apologetic world, because I think there's a lot of weight to it.
Yeah.
And it's something that's very inconvenient for Protestants to try and work around. I mean, they have to kind of like put it up to demonic activity or some other...
Yeah, like Padre Pio, for example. Right. Talk about a man who's not your ordinary man, so many miracles, so many spiritual gifts. And I read, I think it was it Ruffin? It was a Protestant author who did a biography of Padre Pio. Mm-hmm. Very strange, because... like his main point he was impressed was how Padre Pio knew the minor prophets so well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like missing the forest through the trees. It's like, he also knew a lot of other things too. Bilocation.
Stigmata.
Not to mention he was a monk.
Right. Yeah.
Serving mass.
Right, and he talk about humility, right? He went through some tough times with not being able to see his spiritual advisor friend and other stuff, but he always submitted to the church.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so how do you explain that from outside a Catholic worldview? Somebody like Padre Pio.
I don't think you can, right? Yeah. I really think it's too inconvenient of a data point. And especially the fruits that come out of it, right? It's one thing, because I certainly think that people can be deceived and demonic activity is a real thing. But, like these activities make people faithful. There's fruit there. There's really love that is incredibly poured out. People's prayer life, they come into the church, they come back to the church, they fall in love with Jesus. These are the types of things you wouldn't expect if it was demonic activity.
Yeah, right.
Right. So it's all about that degree of expectation, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And unless Satan's against Satan, right?
Which, he's definitely a strange bird, but I don't know if he's that strange, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, just kind of building the case, right? The other things that you brought this up a little bit earlier is the soul. I think there's great philosophical arguments for the immateriality and immortality of the soul. Maybe we could do an episode on that in the future.
That'd be fun.
But then pair that with the scientific evidence from near-death experiences, for example.
Yeah.
There are very good peer-reviewed studies of people who experience bodily death, flat EEGs, fixed dilated pupils, all that stuff, who report veridical sensorial knowledge. So it's one thing that people are having any experience at all when they're clinically dead. We wouldn't expect that if atheism were true, or materialism were true, or physicalism were true.
Mm-hmm.
But it's even more difficult, if not impossible, to explain how they report things that are actually happening in the real world, and oftentimes in different locations that they don't have bodily access to.
Yeah, especially that.
Right? So that just seems so, again, what would we expect this? If there is life after death and if there is a soul, occasionally, yeah, I think we might expect something like this. This seems like a very strong piece of evidence for the theistic worldview in general, and even more so, especially since there's people who've experienced Christ and stuff that aligns very well with the Catholic faith in there. Again, some of these, I think there's merited skepticism with a number of these reports. But I want people to realize is there's very good peer-reviewed studies on this.
Yeah.
It's not just we're not just grabbing these out of some a book at some New Age book in the bargain bin at Barnes & Noble,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
This is stuff that is really well researched and looked into, and has convinced people like Moody, for example, who went in as an agnostic psychologist to come out completely convinced that there's life after death, and that I'm not sure if he's a Christian or not, but he at least went from agnostic to theist, and he's one of the world's foremost researchers on this. So that is a significant piece of evidence, I think. So,
especially that field, I think a Catholic does well or a non-believer does well to be a bit skeptical, just because we don't really have a firm understanding of consciousness and how the process of death affects that. And you also have conflicting data of experiences, like a Mormon will have a Mormon experience,
right.
Catholic, Muslim. But in terms of broad studies, like you said, with these veridical studies, there seems to be an emerging pattern of certain things that seem to be experienced across the board.
Yeah, consistently about like 6 or 7 steps or points that people experience, right? Transcendent love is one of them. That certainly is compatible and converges on Christianity, the loving white light, a feeling of crossing over, if you will, at some points. So it's you're right? So yes, skepticism is merited in some points, and certainly I think in these activities there could be some demonic influence in there. But again, demonic influence is evidence against atheism, right?
Yeah,
so let's be clear.
True.
Like
that's true.
The demonic influence is something I didn't even put exorcisms on here. I should have, right? That there's sometimes a lot of people get scared into the Catholic faith just because they look into the veracity of exorcisms, right?
Yeah, actually that's another data point that's often overlooked is spiritual warfare, demonic activity. I know Sir Arnold Lund, for example, he was atheist, and it was really his curiosity about seances and things like that, which the atheists didn't even want to investigate, which really ticked him off, because he's like, hey, we're supposed to be free thinkers.
Right.
Everything's on the board. But when it came to that, they didn't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And he said, well, there is something going on here. And so maybe my worldview can't account for that. Maybe the world's bigger than my worldview.
Right. Well, the truth is that atheists can often be as evangelical and fundamentalist as any other religious person, and if they let their flock get a little too free thinking, they might soon leave atheism, as I did. And then the other thing I want to say is just kind of flipping it and asking, just from the other perspective. So, like, if I think Catholicism is true, does all this stuff make sense? Yes, it makes beautiful sense. It fits really well. It's the type of stuff that can be handily explained, robustly explained. I might even be able to predict that some of this stuff would occur, right? So it really does seem like strong evidence for that hypothesis. We haven't even talked about other things like our moral experiences, the fine-tuning of the universe, the applicability of mathematics. All these things just, again, fit really well. We're very fitting in theism. Reason itself, consciousness itself. Hard to explain We don't even have to say impossible to explain. Well, it's at least more difficult to explain on an atheist worldview. I personally think some of them are impossible to explain. You just can't explain them. But we don't have to make that strong of a claim. We can be more modest in it and say it's definitely more easily explained on theism. Yeah. And I would argue more simply explained. A very simple explanation, especially if you're a classical theist, right? And then you can ask, if I hypothesize that God does not exist, just flip the perspective, would I expect any of this stuff? And I think any sincere, reflective person who has a sober moment will have to say no. Not at least collectively. Yeah. Like maybe I might expect any one or two of those things, but like the whole sheer volume of it, get out of here. No way, right? It just and the more I've thought about this, you know me, we both like to go on the weeds on some things, to say the least. But like the more I've thought about just the big picture, stepping back, the more it just seems so obviously correct, right? That it's the Catholic faith. And so I guess part of the point I'm trying to make is it's very helpful to step out of the weeds every now and then and just come back to the big picture and ask these hypothetical questions, if you will.
Yeah, big picture apologetics. You know, just giving the landscape, that could be very powerful, because often what I found is people who are opponents of the faith, or even of like theism or Christianity, they're in the weeds too. Right. And sometimes just giving them a broader perspective and saying, look at the whole and explain to me how this integration occurs.
Right. And to be fair, just to give some counterpoints, some people say, well, some things are better predicted on atheism, like what about evil? And I will say only superficially. Substantially, it's not, right? Because the whole idea of evil is something doesn't live up to our expectations of ways things ought to be. So if you're going to hold on to evil in any meaningful sense, you're going to need a moral standard. Now, what worldview better predicts a moral standard? On classical theism, we have a moral standard guaranteed, and God is subsistent goodness itself, right? It's guaranteed. So some people will say, and have argued, that a moral standard on atheism is impossible. We don't have to say that. It's just far, far less improbable, right? So evil, even if you think it initially points away from God, I would say on a more critical reflection, it's actually strong evidence for the existence of God. Another one might be, well, what about evolution? That seems like evidence against Christianity. I would say only superficially so. Only if you're committed to like a crude 6-day creation fundamentalism. But evolution, when you really understand it, requires fine-tuning of the universe, right? It requires the universe to have a very special setup, and that fine-tuning is best explained by intelligence and intentionality at the end of the day that can see value in creating moral communities. So it's not just having a moral standard, but also moral communities that can reflect upon that standard through rationality, right? So like all this stuff is just piling up, I would argue, on the theistic scale. So evolution, again, if it's a superficial pointer to atheism, it's actually in deeper harmony with theism. So that would be my counter push, is anything that might initially seem to strike you against Christianity, upon deeper reflection will end up pointing more favorably to it.
Yeah, and those are the biggies, the problem of evil, right? And
evolution.
That's it. Are there any other possible? Oh, I hear the music. Well, I guess the answer for
to be
today,
continued.
Yes, to be continued. Well, Pat, where can people go to get a hold of your stuff?
The Pat Flynn Show on iTunes and chroniclesofstrength.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming inside the dojo and sharing with us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for listening, everybody. Coming up next, the Terry and Jesse Show, High Impact Catholic Talk. Thank you. It's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center, turn off the dojo lights. Thank you so much for listening. And God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow to do this on Apologetics. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.